I'm Cliff Ribner, and I'm going to talk to you today primarily about a few words in the Declaration of Independence and about their history and about how they apply directly today. Because today we are suffering from exactly the same tyranny that our forefathers in the Revolution fought, a very bloody and difficult revolution against the superpower of the day. This would be like Belgium fighting the United States today. That's what a difficult task it was. The only reason they were able to win was because they finally convinced the French to come and have their gunboats off of Yorktown. They spent the whole war just staying alive and negotiating with France, trying to get them to do that, and they finally did it, and that's how we won. We couldn't have won on our own. Anyway, in the Declaration of Independence, which we've all read at least the beginning of, those beautiful words about how they're fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and how the king and the parliament had violated them. After they described that, they described the specifics of what the king and parliament were doing to them and why that was tyranny. Tyranny can happen in any form. It doesn't matter whether you have a king or a democracy. It doesn't matter how the head of the government got there. They can still create tyranny. And the way it's always done, the way it was done by the King of England at that time, just like it had been done by every monarch in Europe, and it continues to be today, by the way, in Europe. It's never changed. They've never really had a party of freedom. Anyway, the way it's always been done is with bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is when individuals are put in offices that have power over the citizens. And there's three types of power. They recognize this: legislative, executive, and judicial. And the way they wrote our Constitution was those powers were never supposed to be in one person or one agency. They divided them. In the Federalist 47, Madison, the principal author of the Constitution, quoting Montesquieu, says, if those powers are ever combined, it's the very definition of tyranny. And he promised that would never happen because there were real concerns among the Americans at that time, before the Constitution, that could happen. But he told them the Constitution was written to absolutely preclude that. And part of that is because the Declaration of Independence was incorporated by reference. And the Supreme Court finally recognized that in a case called Algier v. the state of Louisiana in 1897. They specifically said the Declaration of Independence is incorporated by reference. All the rights and liberties that they were fighting for in the Revolution are incorporated by reference in the 14th Amendment. Anyway, there's a few words in the Declaration of Independence in which they deliberately lay out. It's the Bill of Particulars. In fact, the way they say it, let facts be submitted to a candid world to show the absolute tyranny over these states, to prove this. And they, first of all, they said he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And they also said he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. What he meant by that was this is the equivalent of courts of Star Chamber, which the king in the English Bill of Rights of 1689 had sworn he would not violate this. William of Orange was permitted to become King of England after they threw out James II for violating this. Courts of Star Chamber were a court which basically made its own rules. And Henry VIII started it, and they were used to execute all his political enemies. But the way they operated was that those courts of Star Chamber included all three powers. And that's what they were talking about when they say this. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. This is when, and what it is these fake courts create their own laws. And that's exactly what we have with all those federal bureaucracies. Every time a federal bureaucracy is created, its only purpose is to police the American people. And the way they do that is they have all three powers. They make their own rules. They make their own laws, and they impose them on us. They give orders to Americans. They're not allowed to be giving orders to Americans. Only a court is allowed to do that. And in the Constitution, they were referring, when they said this, to exactly that's what the King of England was doing. It wasn't just a stamp tax. There was more to it than that. And they wanted to make it clear that this was the definition of tyranny. They didn't want tyranny here whether we had a democracy, no matter what. So basically today we have to fight for the same things that they were fighting for. And these were the same things that had been fought for in the English Bill of Rights in 1689. And at that time, what they did was they got rid of James II. And these same things that I just described to you are taken from what James II promised he would not do. And there was another one that he promised. He promised not to pretend he had the power of dispensation. What it is these courts of Star Chamber would make laws. See, Parliament was the only one who was supposed to make laws in England. And here, in our Constitution, in Article 1, the very first words, all legislative powers shall be in the Congress. That's the way laws are supposed to be made here. And that's not a power that can be delegated. So all of the regulations that these agencies create are completely unconstitutional because they function as laws. They use them to order citizens around. They use them to impose fines on us. That tells you how illegal they are. They're not in the Constitution. There is no fourth branch in the Constitution that's permitted. And that's what they were fighting for in the Revolution. And in the English Bill of Rights, there were the same things where the King of England had to agree that he would not violate these things again. They removed James II. Part of it was he was doing bad stuff to Protestants, taking away their arms, and he imposed a standing army. That's another thing that James II was not allowed to do, to have a standing army. We have a standing army right now. It's been here since 1906 when Teddy Roosevelt created it. The FBI, what do you think they are? They are a standing army whose only purpose is to investigate and bother Americans. It doesn't matter if they're doing it about laws that Congress created if those laws are unconstitutional, because Congress is only allowed to pass the laws that are permitted in Article 1, Section 8. And those in Article 1, Section 8, it specifies every single crime the federal government is allowed to prosecute. It's piracy, but only on the high seas. So that if the pirates come into Savannah and demand bribes from people to walk down the street, that's a Georgia problem. Federal government has no right to stick its nose into that at that point. Piracy on the high seas and counterfeiting. And of course, treason, which had been a common law crime, but Article 3 of the Constitution limits treason. They particularly did not want the federal government, and they didn't want politicians going after their enemies, accusing them of treason. They didn't want that being done, except unless it was really, really bad. So they imposed additional requirements. And the effect of that was, it requires 2 witnesses. And it has to be 2 witnesses to the sedition or treason with a foreign government. Aaron Burr committed treason. They had a trial for him, but they couldn't, it had to be dismissed. He was conspiring with Spain and Mexico to take away the entire Louisiana territory. This was in 1806. And he actually got the general of the army, General Wilkinson, to go along with this. This was potentially a very dangerous act of sedition. Anyway, he got tried for it. He was going to make, and they were going to make him king of the Louisiana territory. They had kings in those days, and he wanted to be king of it. He was a greedy guy. That's really all it was. He had been very brave in the Revolution. In fact, he had become vice president. But anyway, he couldn't be convicted of treason because they couldn't find 2 witnesses. Under the common law definition of treason, it would have been open and shut. But they couldn't convict him. That's what they did. They limited the ability of the federal government to go after people for crimes. They didn't want the federal government sticking its nose into people's lives and businesses. And these words in the Declaration of Independence are very important about how they did not want the fact that he was sending, he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out our substance. And he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. That's the equivalent of the Court of Star Chamber, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. That's what they were fighting the revolution about. And it's exactly the situation we have right now. We don't have a king doing this. We have a Congress and a president doing this. They've been doing it really since 1906. The first one was created in 1887, and it had to do with the railroads. The invention of the railroad was the most incredible contribution to society. We can't even contemplate it today. Before the railroad, you couldn't move anything heavy. The most advanced method of transportation before the railroad was an ox cart or a wagon drawn by horses. So moving things around was practically impossible. And when the railroads came, they were an absolute boon to the economy and to America. And the federal government wanted to stick its nose in. The states first tried, but they couldn't. It was against the Constitution. But anyway, because there were certain states where they were pushing this stuff in particular, primarily in the Midwest. There were a lot of socialists up there. Anyway, the railroads decided to go along with it. That's how it got done, because they realized that in Europe, where this type of agency, where the federal government gets involved in regulating it, becomes a vehicle for the businesses that are already in it to keep out new competition and to make it unnecessary to innovate. And that's exactly what happened. In 1978, the Carter administration looked at the results of the Interstate Commerce Commission. That's what they created, the original one that all of them are modeled after. They are all modeled after the FCC, the FDA. They're all modeled on that particular bureaucracy. They're all just like it. And they're all just as worthless. And the Carter administration, which couldn't have been more left-wing, they looked into it and they said this has been totally worthless the whole time. Just like in 1939, when FDR's Treasury Secretary was testifying before the Senate, he said the whole New Deal legislation was totally worthless. The only result of it was we crushed the economy and we have massive amounts of debt as a result. He literally said that. And we are still stuck with all the bureaucracies that were formed under the New Deal. They've never been repealed. They're still there. We've had multiple Republican administrations after that. None of them repealed any of it. We still have the SEC, which is absolutely terrible. It's nothing but a boon to lawyers. That's who benefits from all these things. Basically, each federal agency has its own constituency, which is the business and the lawyers who serve that business that they have jurisdiction over. And that's the way they're set up. And when they're set up, they're always promises that, oh, we're going to use this to benefit the public, and it's going to make people safer. It never does any of that. Federal bureaucrats don't have the power to do that, and the businesses have every incentive to make their stuff as safe as possible, because if they harm people with their products, they're subject to state laws, and the state laws are the only ones that need to be policing them. And we even have all these agencies since the 70s, really. Started with Ralph Nader, got it done. He was a major figure in American history, even though he never won an election. But he was a major figure because he got all these supposedly consumer agencies where they literally don't let anything be sold that they don't approve of. So all of this are disincentives to inventors, for one thing. And the federal government sticks its nose into every product that's sold in the country. And even when they bless it and say, oh, yeah, it's safe, they can still be sued under state law, because what's happened is since the 1970s, state tort law, that's the law of civil wrongs, liability has been expanded by courts following the arguments of left-wing law professors saying why we need to expand liability. And the professors are very open about it. They say we want to socialize all harms so that basically anytime anybody gets hurt by anything, they have to be paid by somebody. They can't just bear the burden themselves, get their own insurance, or not mishandle the product. They're a product liability. They invented the concept of no-fault tort liability. This is completely antithetical to what tort law is supposed to be about. Tort law is about imposing liability on people who either intentionally or negligently harm someone. and there has to be, the plaintiff has to have real damage. What they've also done is it created the concept of class actions, where a lawyer who's the only one who benefits, what it is damage is an element of, there has to be damage for there to be a tort. That's an element of each tort. And if you have, say, 50,000 people, all of whom are damaged by 1 penny because of what somebody does, none of them are going to bring a lawsuit. But if a lawyer says that's what happened, he can bring the lawsuit. And this is what they do. This is what these class actions are. So they've expanded tort liability. They've created the concept of these class actions where millions of people, none of whom are really damaged, none of whom would have been damaged sufficiently to bring a lawsuit, become the class, and the only one who actually makes any money on it is a lawyer. But it harms the defendant. The defendant pays a real price. And what this has done, and it's not just that defendant, it's everyone who's in business who becomes a potential target for one of these things, has to be concerned about it. So there's been a multitude of ways that our economy and ultimately all of us are being attacked. It's the creation of these federal bureaucracies, which really multiplied. They really started, the first one was the Interstate Commerce Commission. Then under Theodore Roosevelt, he created the FBI and the FDA, which has just complete jurisdiction over all. At that time, the agriculture was about 90% of the economy. It had complete jurisdiction over all food and drugs. And they knew they should have had to get a constitutional amendment to pass such a thing, because they knew that, because they were passing prohibition at the same time, and they knew they needed a constitutional amendment for that. So Teddy Roosevelt just went ahead and did this, and Congress went along with it. And basically these things mushroomed over the 20th century. The currency was nationalized in 1913 when the Fed was created, and then under FDR in the 1930s, all these agencies were created, crushing the economy. And it just kept going on and on under both Republicans and Democrats. The Republican Party, they were just like doormats. Anytime the Democrats had the votes, they passed these things. And the Republicans never did a thing about it. And none of it ever got repealed, because the filibuster rule, which the Senate unconstitutionally created, requires 60 votes to repeal anything. So we've had this expansion of all these, exactly the things our forefathers in the Revolution were complaining about the king did. We've got it so far beyond what they had, it's not even close. The king didn't come close to having dozens of these agencies. We don't even know how many there are. We know that there's millions of employees, and every one of them is there in an office whose only purpose is to attack, to prey on the American businesses and the American citizens in a variety of ways. Anyway, our forefathers in the Revolution fought for this, fought against this, after fighting against it in the 17th century. And now we have to do the same thing that's been won twice. Because when they won the Revolution, they defeated the right of the king or the central government to do any of this. I'm Cliff Ribner, and if you like what I have to say, please like this video, let people know about it. Go to my website, cliffordribner.com, and buy my book, Freedom's Last Stand, which has all my ideas in it. Thank you.